Part 11. Chapter 39. Stranded. Oh, for God's sake, stop being so fussy.
It's not fussiness. It's pain.
Obi-Wan hissed as Padme tightened the cloth wrapped around his chest. Well, you're definitely not going to be moving around for the next little while, she said, examining her bandaging job with evident dissatisfaction. We'll get you to a proper medic once we get back to the camp. Yeah, about that. She looked over her shoulder to see Anakin striding in from the engine room, forehead smeared with grease. Her stomach dropped just slightly, seeing him. Near-death experiences did have a way of making one reevaluate where their relationship stood, but she still wasn't sure whether or not she and her husband were allowed to go back to normal yet. In lieu of greeting him, she simply returned her attention to the Jedi's dressings. The hyperdrive, Anakin said, collapsing into his chair, is blown to hell.
But it's not unfixable. That's the good news. And the bad?
Asked Obi-Wan, leaning forward but then hastily retreating backward again. We don't have any of those parts on hand, said the pilot, exhaustion etched across his face. And I only barely managed to haggle the new compression coil. So, we're not going to get any new parts from anyone in camp. He gave a shaky laugh. And I don't know about you, but I'm fresh out of miracles. Well, it's not ideal, Padme said, but we could always pay for passage on someone else's ship, you know? Now that the cracks are opening up, we could even stow away if no one lets us on board. Just leave her here? Anakin asked, sounding vaguely hurt. After all the work we've put into her? Fallacy of sunk costs, Skywalker, Liz interjected, ambling over from the engine. I've been telling you for years we need to get rid of this piece of... We'd be out of here if it weren't for you, Liz. Stow it, Padme said. The droid, perhaps realizing she was outgunned... Shut up. I don't think we can risk stowing away, the Jedi said, running a hand across his beard. We couldn't keep all four of us quiet long enough. We could always steal the ship. Liz? Well, four of us couldn't stow away. What about just you, though? Anakin asked, looking thoughtful. That could work. The bumpy ride wouldn't be great for your ribs, man, but it's better than nothing. Absolutely not. Obi-Wan shook his head vehemently. I've gotten word to Bail, or at least tried as best I can. I'm no more valuable than any of you, and I'm not about to leave you here. Padme had to admit. He grew on you. Well, she said, looks like we're all stuck here then. She yanked on the final strip of cloth, prompting a sharp inhalation. Anakin furrowed his brow. Well, that's not the worst idea. We could all wait here. Hide in the caverns until they roll out their full invasion force, then steal one of their ships. Make for the Republic. That would depend on us not being found in the meantime, Obi-Wan said, frowning. That's a rather big if. Is there any other kind? Anakin leaned closer. No, think about it. We don't want to be found, let's get lost. Make our way back to the unmapped caverns we got stuck in. Land the ship. We have enough rations to stay there for days. Maybe weeks if we stretched it. It's a long wait to have nothing but each other to help pass the time, Padme said, the reflexive snark leaving her mouth before she could stop it. If the jab needled Anakin, he didn't show it. Sure, it'd suck, but I think it'd work. After all, who's going to find us? Before he had completed the final syllable, a klaxon began blaring. Wearily, Obi-Wan noted, if you'd rerouted some of the budget for your alarms into budgeting for spare parts, we might have a functioning hyperdrive. It's a proximity alert, Padme said, hauling herself to her feet. They're here. They must have followed us. The pulse of the klaxon was gradually increasing in tempo. Whoever it is, they're closing fast. Yeah, and of course I had to land the ship with the cannon facing the other way, Anakin said. The Jedi grabbed his lightsaber with one hand and shakily stood. We may be out of options. Gratefully, Padme realized that the despair that she'd sunk into during their chase wasn't falling over her now. Now it felt too unreal. This was some perverse farce staged by some malicious god, and the three of them had fallen into the lead roles, clearly. Gang members, bugs, bombers, starfighters, and now... What? She was almost curious. Dropping a hand to her belt, Padme gripped her pistol. Well, couldn't have asked to go out with a nicer group of people. And briskly, she strode for the exit ramp. Come on, see who it is. The ramp squealed angrily when she first hit the release switch. When she punched again, the squeal turned into a moan, and then it relented. As the ramp ground downward, Obi-Wan and Anakin flanked Padme on either side. From behind, Liz called, "Have fun!" An increasing roar of engines could be heard over the sound of the ramp's valiant effort to touch the cave floor. And, in the distance, a warm glow of floodlights was growing in intensity. Padme gripped the blaster in both hands. Obi-Wan shifted his saber's hilt from one to the other. Anakin simply stood, waiting. The glow resolved into 2 pinpoints of light. Padme squinted. Whatever this ship was, it didn't appear to be armed. She couldn't quite tell, but it appeared to be bright red, and its shape was far too sleek for military hardware. In fact, it almost looked like a racing speeder? Anakin asked. That doesn't make any sense. Obi-Wan frowned.
That's not all. I said something. It's...
He closed his eyes for a few moments. Then he sighed.
Oh no.
What? Padme demanded. When he didn't reply. Kenobi, what is it?
She's never going to let me hear the end of this section.
As I live and breathe, Obi-Wan Kenobi and company. Anakin squinted through the still burning floodlights of the other ship, trying to solidify the silhouette calling out to them as she approached. He was stunned. That was one hell of a response time. Obi-Wan had already started forward to meet the new arrival, limp striding away from the dancer.
It's all right. Padme, you can put that down.
Lowering her blaster, not holstering it, Padme shot her husband a look. Kenobi? A girlfriend? I don't think that's it, he muttered back. He could feel something emitted from the woman. Something like faint pulses of luminescence. It was the same thing he occasionally felt coming from Obi-Wan, no matter how hard he tried to ignore it. Whoever she was, the pilot was pretty damn sure that she was another Jedi. As she drew closer, he was better able to make her out through the glare. Dressed all in black, coat swirling behind her, her dark skin stood out in sharp relief against the floodlights, and there was a glint of metal at her side, hanging from her hip like a gunslinger's sidearm. Anakin had a feeling he knew what that was. She walked with an easy confidence, one that suggested she knew exactly what she was capable of, and unlike Obi-Wan, had no intention of hiding it, despite the circumstances. The bearded Jedi held up his arms, warding off a hug.
I've seen too much action as it is, I'm afraid.
Smirking, the woman stuck out her right hand. As if you'd accept a hug even if you weren't injured, man. Obi-Wan clasped the proffered hand, and her smirk softened into warmth. Anakin felt it radiating from her in a rush. Didn't play her emotions close to the chest, this one. Oh, to be fair, she might not realize that anyone but Obi-Wan could sense her feelings. Been a long time, Obi-Wan.
Indeed it has.
The general turned to his hosts.
Anakin, Padme, this is Qui-Gon Jinn, my old partner, Jedi Knight. Qui-Gon, these are Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala, my friends.
Qui-Gon bowed, slightly. If you saved this guy's sorry ass as much as I suspect, I owe you many thanks. Glancing up at the ship, looking past the two of them, she arched an eyebrow. Especially if you did in that thing. Flushing, Anakin opened his mouth to defend the honor of the spice dancer, but Padme cut in first. Well, that's fair, coming from the ascetic wizard with the race speeder. Someone else might have been offended, but the new arrival simply chuckled. Yeah, fair enough. I retract the comment. Hi. Obi-Wan raised an eyebrow.
Well, loath as I am to question your methods, where did you get that? In fact, how are you here so soon? I can't have called for help more than an hour ago. I thought you were still stationed on Coruscant.
You called for help? Confusion entered her expression. How did you get the communication out?
Wait, if you don't know we called for help, what are you doing here?
Well, the Chancellor sent me.
Bail sent you?
Before she could reply, a bigger realization widened the General's eyes further.
Wait, you know Bail?
You Jedi have a really tight ship, Padme said. Okay, look, Anakin said. Let's talk about this inside, all right? We're making a lot of noise, and there are bugs. That got everyone moving. Section. The ship was a piece of crap, no mistake about that, but there was something endearing about the way Obi-Wan's new acquaintances had tried to make it into a home. The patterned cloth bolted to the galley table, the single piece of art Qui-Gon had seen suspended from a bedroom wall over her brief look through the place. It's in the little touches, you know? She waved away the ration bar she was offered. Oh, no thanks, I had one identical to that on the way here. Another one? Oh, this thing is becoming a space terminal! An electronic voice barked as a patchwork sort of droid ambled into the room. and abruptly its red eyes faded to a gentle blue.
Oh, hello. Lovely to meet you. I have to wonder, how did you get on board?
I'm a spy, duh, Qui-Gon said, and extended her left hand to shake the droid's. Hi, I'm Qui-Gon Jinn at your service. As they clasped appendages, the droid's eyes snapped red. When she spoke again, her voice was an octave lower.
A pleasure. LZ-824, conglomeration of whatever junk this guy could get his hands on.
She did a remarkable imitation of raising an eyebrow and turned her head to Skywalker.
See, some people still know respect.
Skywalker's irritation blipped through her senses. It was buried deep enough among a host of other emotions that the Jedi probably wouldn't have even felt it normally, but she was already keeping an eye on this one. She'd felt the wellspring of his power as soon as she had touched down. It'd be far too rude to mention it to him, but I imagine Obi-Wan will still have some things to say about it later. So, Obi-Wan interjected. Bail wandered into the underworld, unsupervised, on the off chance it would get a Jedi to follow him, and then sent you here, alone, in a race car, to see if I was still alive and rescue me. He sounded vaguely like a scandalized mother talking with a teacher about her misbehaving 5-year-old. And indeed you were, she replied brightly. No harm done. He's reckless, your friend the Chancellor, but he's a good man. And we're going to have to hope that reckless streak continues if this planet has any chance of surviving. Do you think he'll have sent in the fleet? Amidala asked, her tone impatient. Not that Qui-Gon could blame her. The entire room kind of reeked of exhaustion. If Obi-Wan's message got through, is the fleet coming? Not the full fleet, Obi-Wan said, now his voice assuming something of the strategically planted resonance that Qui-Gon imagined he used in tactical meetings. There wouldn't be time. It took Qui-Gon a day to get here from the core, and the hyperdrive on that thing is probably a good deal faster than our capital ships. But he could send in my whole division. The plan was for them to wait in Kashyk's orbit during the course of this operation. That's only a couple hours' jump away. Qui-Gon resisted smiling affectionately at this, just being reminded of her old partner's habit when they'd worked together of carefully laying out the details of some plan only for a minor wrench to render the whole thing obsolete. Yeah, well, Obi-Wan, believe me, I want to see the clones sent packing as much as you do, but that's irrelevant to our current mission parameters, so let's get you extracted. I've brought a rescue ship, and whether or not the fleet shows up, we're gone. What about them? The sudden forcefulness in his voice kind of startled her. That contraption Bail sent you in only seats 2. Confusion slowed her response for a few moments. A rarity, frankly. Are we not sitting in your ship right now? She asked the pair of them. Yeah, well, Amidala's semi-permanent glare deepened a notch. We found out about an hour ago that our hyperdrive is on the fritz, in the middle of a dogfight, in case you were wondering how Obi-Wan got his message out. Her stomach dropped just a little. This ship sucked, but she'd had visions of rocketing off the planet, holding up the proverbial finger to the bearer of a certain red lightsaber just as they landed on the surface. For a moment she wanted to curse vividly. Instead, nope, she looked up at Obi-Wan. Good old Obi-Wan, who shook his head and said, I won't leave them, Qui-Gon. They've saved my life 10 times over in the last few days.
That's right,
the droid burst in.
I'm not staying on this rock heap another second longer than I have to.
Obi-Wan, look, Skywalker said, looking very uncomfortable with this display of loyalty. This is more important than... No, Anakin, it isn't. She had to admit, when the man put on his general voice, it did a good job of shutting people up. Slowly moving his gaze among the 3 of them, or 4 if you counted Liz, he continued. I got my message out. That's the most I could do here. My military rank makes no difference anymore. You have sacrificed more than I should have ever asked you to, and I will not repay you by leaving you here on the off chance you can hide out long enough to avoid trouble. We all go, or none of us do.
Damn straight.
All eyes turned to Qui-Gon. For a few moments, a feckless, selfish part of her wanted to, knock him out and drag him onto the ship and leave. To outrun what she knew was coming, and just wish the others the absolute best of luck. She let the Force take that part of her and break it up into the tiniest possible particles, and disperse those particles on the waves of time and space, because she was a Jedi. It's her job. Well then, she said. Then let's start thinking of a plan. Section.
Republic Archives, Typhoon Division. Typhoon Division is the designation for Alderaan's most famous group of naval vessels, serving under the command of General Obi-Wan Kenobi, or in his absence, Commander Tenira Cody. It is led by the Star Destroyer Coelacanth, a Victory-class vessel, 3 Consular-class frigates, Ferox, Ichthys, and Manta, and 2 fighter squadrons, Sawshark, Z-95 Heavy Hunters, and Barracuda, ARC-170s. Round out Typhoon Division. The division is most notable for the number of conflicts that they have resolved without firing. Typhoon Division's penchant for avoiding bloodshed has earned their leader his famous nickname, Kenobi the Negotiator. Despite this, when it does come down to fighting, the division is extremely effective. Sawshark Squadron has one of the highest kill counts in the Republic Defense Force, and Typhoon Division alone liberated the Ord Ibanez system from its brief occupation by pirates in 1146. On their home planet of Alderaan, the Typhoons are regarded with near celebrity status. They are referred to as the Heroes of Alderaan in recruitment materials for their RDF, and Typhoon Division's emblem, the Coelacanth, and a pair of Z-95s, in front of a cyclone of water, can be found hanging on the walls of university dormitories, offices, and shops all across Alderaan.
Chapter 40. Sawsharks. Excuse me again. The Coelacanth's main hangar. We're in a hangar of a Star Destroyer here. The Coelacanth's main hangar was a cacophony of power tools and engine tests, conversations by the water cooler, and announcements blared over the intercom. Flight Lieutenant Karen Jansen heard none of it. She was zoned in on the sound that was closest to her. Thump, 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 thump. A palm-sized ball that she tossed across the hangar deck rebounded off a nearby parked starfighter, an immaculately kept Z-95 headhunter, Teague. A Z-95 is an X-wing that doesn't have an X-shaped wing pattern, but just one line of wings going across it. The other type kind of look like that, but they're more Attack of the Clonesy. But a Z-95 headhunter is basically an X-wing with no X. And Teague. The palm-sized ball she tossed toward the hangar deck rebounded off a nearby parked starfighter, an immaculately kept Z-95 headhunter, before landing again in her open hand. The thump, the thump, the thump, the thump, the thump. Rinse and repeat. The rhythmic action was actually therapeutic, and it drowned out the buzz of activity around her. The thump, the thump, the... She looked up. Her ball had been intercepted. A Twi'lek woman held the toy aloft, a scolding look playing across her face. "You're throwing a stress ball at my ship, ma'am." Karen smirked. "I am throwing a stress ball at the deck. It's just bouncing off the ship, which isn't yours, by the way. The Royal House bought it. RDF maintains it. So..." The Twi'lek, still holding the ball, raised an eyebrow. "Fair enough, let me rephrase. You're throwing a stress ball at my paint job, ma'am." She was right. In fact, Corinne's own headhunter was painted, too, adorned with a few scars, streaks of black paint jagged across white wings. She tossed the ball in the air, catching it on its way down. "Well, yeah, but I don't want my paint to have scuffs on it." "Fair enough," Karen said. "Note to self, no more throwing balls at Shiva's precious starfighter." The Twi'lek smiled. "Glad we're on the same page, Sawshark Leader." Shiva tossed the stress ball back to Karen, then moved in closer and spoke in a whisper. "Hey, are you okay? Seriously. You only do the stress ball thing when you're nervous." Her expression darkened. "Of course I'm nervous. I don't like this. We're going in completely blind. No idea what we're up against. It could end badly." Silence lingered for a moment. "Keep that last part to yourself." "Aye, aye, ma'am," Shiva said. The flight lieutenant stood up straight and turned around and tossed her ball into the open cockpit of her starfighter. Placing 2 fingers in her mouth, she let out a piercing whistle. It cut through the drone of the hangar's various noises pretty well. When she was confident she had everyone's attention, she shouted, "Sawsharks, gather up!" Footfalls drummed throughout the cavernous hangar as 10 pilots, in addition to her, adorned in blue jumpsuits, jogged to meet their squadron leader. The Sawsharks filed in and formed a circle around Flight Lieutenant Jansen as she stood in the center of them, surrounded by human and alien alike. She rotated slowly, meeting every squadron member in the eye as she turned. All right, everybody. We're coming up on dropout. I just want to say a few words before we start our pre-flights, all right? Thank you guys for coming. Any one of you could have left before we made that last jump. None of you did. I'm sure the General will appreciate it. Thank you. She shoved the hands into the pockets of her jumpsuit and looked down at the deck. Okay, down to business. I'll be honest, we're going in kind of blind here. There's not much intel on the force that we're facing, so... Don't know what's going to happen. We could end up outnumbered.
Good, means more kills to rack up.
A Barabel piped up from the circle of pilots. The reptilian bared his teeth and clenched a clawed, scaly fist. Karen couldn't contain a slight smirk. Cool it, Ren. This isn't about your kill count, man. It's about stopping a planetary invasion. There will be fighters, but our primary goal is to keep them from getting people on the ground. Troop transports? Asked a Rhodian pilot, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Yeah, troop transports, Karen replied, an approving finger pointing in the Rhodian's direction. She began to pace along the deck in a tight back and forth. Thank you, Biko. But this is a trickier one than usual. Ideally, we would take the transports out before they got to the atmosphere. A hushed whisper was traded between two members of the huddle, and Karen paused to stare at them. Something you'd like to share with the class, Roland? The Bith pilot in Karen's crosshairs turned toward his squadron leader, domed head reflecting the artificial light of the hangar. I said it sounded impossible, ma'am. That's all. Snorting, the Bothan woman next to Roland interjected. Impossible? You said it was... An elbow to the ribs from her Bith squad mate cut her off, and the grin disappeared from her face. That's enough, you two, Karen said, shooting the pair a glance that fell somewhere between scolding and actually amused. I know never ever letting the troop transports leave space and get to the atmosphere will be tricky, but we have a good reason. The atmosphere. It completely screws with comms. You can't transmit anything to space once you're in Head Abaddon's atmosphere. Don't make it there. The faces of the Saw Sharks grew grim as reality set in. And Karen probably didn't need to spell it out, but she did. You won't be able to call for backup if you dip below Atmo. Those of us left in space will have no idea we lost you. This means no diving below Atmo without a wingmate, ever. No diving beneath the Atmo without asking me first, ever. Are we clear? Aye, aye, ma'am. A mix of 11 mumbled aye-ayes broke the silence left by Karen's question. In the background, someone wheeled a trash can from one place to t'other. The pilots waited for the trash can to pass. Karen finished her water beer. Karen nodded, then gestured to another huddle of pilots across the hangar. One last thing. Barracuda Squadron is a little light on personnel right now. They're going to have all 12 ships, but their rear gunners are all going to be empty, okay? There's no fighters, or there's no rear gunner positions on those fighters right now. Just watch their backs, all right? Those fighters wouldn't need rear guns if they weren't loaded down with all that armor, muttered a Celestin woman as she shot a sideways glance at the pilot next to her. Karen pointed a finger at the woman. Mira, I'm being serious. I'll sit there and poke fun at ARC 170s with you all day, but when it comes down to it, I would rather have everyone make it out of here in one piece. Mira nodded solemnly, and silence hung in the air for several moments. It was broken by a single clap from the flight lieutenant. All right, get to your ships. Wrap up last-minute maintenance, do your pre-flights, be in the cockpit in 5 minutes. Roland, don't forget to put your hydrospanner away this time. If it gets sucked out into space, I've got a feeling you're not going to get it back this one, all right? Band of pilots chuckled. Even Roland was letting out the Bith equivalent of a laugh, which was kind of weird. As the laughter faded and the hollow vastness of the hangar swelled in its place, pilots turned one by one and returned to their starfighters. Okay, here we go. Karen's footfalls resounded across the deck as she crossed it. As she passed beneath the parked starfighter, she ran her hand along the underside of her own C-95's starboard wing. The off-white paint of it left tiny flecks on her fingertips. The ship was definitely due for a new coat. Funny, Karen thought as she rubbed her fingers together to brush flecks away. It's seen nothing but training exercises since the last paint job. No blaster fire to burn this off. You'd think it would have held up better. I guess space is harsh for paint. The pilot clambered up the ladder attached to the side of her ship, pausing at the top to check her wrist chronometer. Time to arrival was growing closer. Oh God. Karen attempted to swallow the lump rising in her throat, then fished inside her open cockpit for the stress ball she had discarded there earlier. Deep breaths moved in time with her grip on the stress ball as she settled into the cockpit. She shook her head and silently cursed herself for getting so damn nervous. I mean, yeah, it was the first battle the Saw Sharks had had in years, but this was the sort of thing that they trained for rather heavily. And yet all she could do to mask her nerves was crack dumb jokes in front of the team. I might be on the wrong line of work, she thought to herself. Karen Jansen, the cargo pilot from Alderaan, who liked to race speeders in her spare time. Karen Jansen, who joined up with the Republic Defense Force as soon as she was old enough to, because she wanted to see the stars. Karen Jansen took one final deep breath and held it. And when she let it out, she became someone else. She was Saw Shark leader now. She had to be. It was her job. 11 lives rested on her shoulders. And it was her job to get each one of them through this. Saw Shark leader reached toward the master power switch in her starfighter's cockpit and flipped it on. Section. Commander, you're pacing again. Cody froze in place, glancing down at the deck. Chief Reyes was right. He was pacing again. And the line of slight discoloration along the floor where he'd been walking for the better part of the last hour served as evidence of that. No matter, that's what the cleaning droids were for. He turned to look at Reyes. The young officer was presenting him with a datapad. Thank you, Chief, Cody said with a nod, accepting the device from his officer. Of course, sir. I've already passed some of that info around, she said, gesturing to the datapad. I was able to reconstruct the IFF of the ship Kenobi transmitted from. That way we'll know which one not to shoot at. If we came all this way and accidentally blew up the general, I mean, that would give you an awful lot of paperwork, sir. Cody raised an eyebrow. Can't have that, can we? No, sir, she said with a grin. She turned around and moved back to her station. Though he stared down at the datapad, Cody's focus was elsewhere. Paperwork, yeah. Well, he knew he'd be doing more than filling out paperwork if they failed to rescue the general. I mean, paperwork did suck. It did suck, but Chancellor Organa would probably try to take the blame for all of this. That was the kind of guy he was. But Cody knew the Defense Force would be after more than one head for this. They couldn't punish all of Typhoon, probably, but they could certainly punish the people in charge. It was easy to imagine himself getting court-martialed for this. Stripped of that title, forced to find work off-world. I mean, he'd be the second most hated guy on Alderaan if this went wrong. So, it was, for all intents and purposes, the first battle in a war with the Galactic Confederacy. And to lose that battle, Tamira Cody might as well change his name and just move to the Outer Rim. Win that battle. Oh my god. Hold on, no sense getting ahead of yourself, Cody. Deal with the aftermath when the time comes. Focus on the task right now. That's what Obi-Wan would do. And so what he did was focus, returning his attention to the datapad and reading what little intel they had on the situation over Had Abaddon as the countdown clock on the Coelacanth bridge, one tracking the remaining time for hyperspace, ticked down. Section. 5 minutes. In another futile attempt to ignore the blinking countdown display in her face, Karen adjusted her seat restraints. Okay, that's fine. Donned her communications earpiece, fiddled with it. The toggle of a switch on her fighter's control panel brought a warm hiss of static to her right ear. Okay, cool. Some pilots complained about the hiss. Karen loved it. Only way to know it's working, she had told Ailish Eero, the newest member of Saw Shark Squadron, on the young Mirialon's first day of training. Karen tapped her earpiece and took a deep breath. Saw Shark Leader, con check. You're good, Saw Shark Leader, crackled the voice of Operations Chief Reyes. Everybody ready upstairs, Reyes? Ready as we'll ever be for something like this, Lieutenant. Corinne divided her attention as she reached forward to toggle the next set of switches in her ship's startup sequence. Good. Does the commander look nervous? Not at all, Reyes replied after a brief pause. She couldn't help but smile. You're a terrible liar, Reyes. Yep. Even over the comm, it was obvious she was grinning. All right, good luck to you guys. And good luck to all of you while you're out there. Go kick some ass. Ma'am. Will do, Chief, Karen replied before toggling her comm to a different channel. Okay. Through the transparent steel of her closed cockpit, she could hear the loudspeaker announcement ordering closed to clear the hangar. The flight lieutenant gave her stress ball one final squeeze before shoving it into a mesh pocket on the side. Couldn't have that bouncing around the cockpit in a dogfight. Metal groaned against metal as the hulking blast doors covering the hangar exit slid aside early. Victory-class Star Destroyers had hangar exits on the ventral surface, tucked into a recessed square that most pilots called the docking box. Beyond the docking box, Corinne could just make out the oscillating blues of hyperspace. Eesh, every safety regulation in the book cautioned against opening the hangar's doors in the middle of hyperspace travel. Because if you fall out, you really die! But the coelacanth needed to launch her fighters as fast as possible once dropping out at light speed. Every second would count, and opening the blast door took several. She stared at it.
I suppose now would be a bad time to hit the accelerator,
crackled a distinctly Rhodian voice over the comms. Biko's comment was met with a handful of slightly uncomfortable snickers.
You might be fine.
Another voice piped up.
They've got those escape pods that can be ejected during hyperspace jumps. Anyone know if a Z-95 is rated for that?
Don't encourage him, Mira, Corinne scolded. Hey, Biko, you're more than welcome to try stupid hyperspace shit after we've rescued the general and fought off a horde of clones. The lieutenant was interrupted by a chirping alarm from within her cockpit. They were almost there. Time to fully power up her engines. The roar of 24 starfighters rising from the hangar deck caused the transparisteel of Karen's cockpit to gently vibrate. I'm back and forth between Karen and Corinne, sorry. She could feel her fighter swaying gently back and forth as it hovered in the air. Corinne gripped the flight stick with one hand and keyed her comm back on with the other. All right, Saw Sharks, let's switch to call signs. Keep this channel strictly business. We're going 60 seconds. All wings report in. Section.
Republic Archives, Z-95 Headhunter. The Z-95 Headhunter is a multi-purpose starfighter jointly produced by Incom Corporation and Sublight Products. Its balance of durability, reliability, and ease of repair make it a favorite both of the Republic Defense Force and private organizations. The fighter is equipped with 4 Sublight engines, and a laser cannon is mounted at the end of each of its 2 wings. Concussion missile tubes are integrated into the lengthy body of the starfighter. The craft is lightly armored. Defense is instead provided by a pair of kinetic energy deflector shield generators. Kinetic energy deflector shield generators. The stock Z-95 is not equipped with a hyperdrive. However, the majority of Z-95s ordered for the RDF do have them. This was done in the interest of allowing Z-95 squadrons to run long-range missions on their own, without the need of a carrier ship. Hyperdrive installation is also a popular aftermarket modification for civilian owners of the starfighter.
Last chapter of the day. Chapter 41. Doldrums. Okay, Anakin said. First things first. Even if we can figure out a way to get us all out of here, making it past orbit is going to be almost impossible. Obi-Wan raised his eyebrows and took a sip of the wretched caf they had tried to brew before settling down for this strategy meeting. Tasted like muck, but anything that could inject some energy into his veins was worth it. That's a first from you. Yeah, well, the first time we went up, they didn't know we were coming. And if the hyperdrive had been working, we could have made a jump and been out of here before they realized what was happening. Now they know we're here. They know we blew up a bunch of their ships. They're going to have fighters waiting to catch us as soon as we break Atmo. Star scratching across his face, his frown deepened. We can't go to the other side of the planet and take off. We can't go anywhere, really. There's only one hyperlane in and out, and our clone friends are sitting on top of it. And this is assuming nothing will interrupt them from patrolling us, though. I'm sorry. This is assuming that nothing's going to interrupt them from patrolling for us, though, Qui-Gon put in, raising an eyebrow. Chancellor Organa told me, if things came to it, he would handle the military part. So let's just assume that he's good as his word and send Obi-Wan's division in. A space battle is many things, most of them bad, but it's excellent cover for making an escape. Padme. So the whole escape plan hinges on a wealthy politician fulfilling a promise. Solid. Raising a hand, the general said, He sent Qui-Gon here. I think that's evidence enough of his trustworthiness. And as your husband has said, we do seem to be running out of plan Bs. Fine. A bitter sort of smile formed. We'll assume there's a space battle. One that we're going to have to punch our way through before we get out of here. Trust me when I say, the clones will have their hands full. Okay, fine. We're agreed. Hope for a space battle, said Anakin. idly opening and closing his mechanical fingers. Hyperdrive. We're agreed that we're not going to steal one, right?
I never agreed. I guess I don't get a vote, though,
Said Liz from the wall she was leaning against. And they say machines can't learn, Padme drawled. Qui-Gon, Anakin said. You had to have come with a hyperdrive ring to use that thing, right? As a matter of fact, no, she said. Space knows where the Chancellor got a hold of it, but that little thing has a hyperdrive on it. Oh, shit. Everyone's eyebrows shot up at once. What class? Demanded Padme. Class 2, I think. It's very high-tech. A crestfallen look immediately fell over Anakin's face. Damn it. The answer is a Class 3. Ugh. The hyperdrive is shaky even when it's working. We can't slot components from a Class 2 in, it'd fry us. Well, certainly, it's worth a shot. If we could just make one jump... No, dude, you don't understand. Like, it could fry us in the middle of installation. Ah. Damn. Padme jumped back in, standing as she did so to dump her mug in the sink. Okay. Well, your division is big, right? You've got capital ships. He nodded. My ship is a victory class. Turbo lasers, hangar bay, the works, yeah. Well, if they're coming, we could land there. She shrugged. Not that I like the idea of being on a warship in the middle of a dogfight, but it's better than nothing. I suppose it might have to do. The general took a sip of calf. Nope, decided against it and spat it back out, then sighed deeply. Pity I couldn't have landed the ship I came in one piece. Not that it would have done much good buried down here in a cave system, but... Through the Force, a burst of alarm slammed into him like a wave. What the? His eyes shot upward to the source of the emotion. It was Anakin. Hey, wait. Exactly how much of the ship did you crash? The Jedi frowned for a second. Oh. He stood suddenly, cringed at the pain in his chest, but started to pace. A little more than half. The Blitz tore off the sublight engines, but the main housing for the hyperdrive was still there. It was useless for the ship, but for us... Okay, what class do the clones use on their capital ships? Oh, struggling to think back to the details of his briefing, Obi-Wan paused for a few moments. Certainly no lower than a 2.5. Probably 3. They're built cheap. Anakin was nodding, the corners of his mouth starting to rise. All right, well that could work. It'd be a patchwork, and I don't know if it would last more than one jump, but that's what we need. You two get to Obi-Wan's ship on the race car. Padme and Liz and I make the jump anywhere that isn't here. When Obi-Wan looked over to Qui-Gon, she too was starting to grin. I like this young man. Knows what he's doing. Padme, you said you just walked to Jiro Grotto from where you crashed, right? Her eyes narrowing. Nodding, the general replied. The way I came in was barely big enough for me, much less a ship. But we know the rough location. I'm sure the two of you could find a larger way in. Okay, Anakin said, his grin now fully formed. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we finally have a plan. Find a way for 2 ships through the caverns, said Qui-Gon, ticking items off on her fingers. Venture through the unstable wreckage of a capital ship. Salvage the parts we need, if we can, and repair a broken-down ship's hyperdrive, if we can, in the middle of what could turn into a battle for the history of everything. And a planet which is still on fire. Cakewalk. Well, Obi-Wan concluded, let's get to it. This was interrupted by a sharp hiss as he moved wrong and then felt his ribs grinding against each other. Before that, his old partner left him. You and I should go outside to attempt some healing meditation. We can't have you shifting hyperdrive parts when you can barely stand up. She looked to Anakin and Padme. Can we spare 10 minutes? I'll be fine, honestly. Obi-Wan hastily cut in, but even as he said so, he winced. His friends looked at each other, then back at him. Go ahead, said Padme. But your Force had better work fast. Thanks, Qui-Gon said, rising from the table and taking Obi-Wan. Come on, Kenobi, let's get this done. As he allowed himself to be pulled away, Obi-Wan reached out to touch his old friend's mind. Whoa. What he found there left him confused and wary. In her mind was resolve, certainly, and warmth, but also something like resignation. And below that, deep, deep fear. Section. Left alone, husband and wife looked at each other. Anakin racked his brain for some witticism, flippant comment about what they were about to attempt. He came up empty. He was tired. 7 years they'd known each other. 7 years. And now... Hey, he said, remember when we first met? Padme's response was a lengthy eye roll. Really, Skywalker? That's the cliche we're going to go with? I don't know what I expected, he thought, and valiantly continued. No, I mean it. Remember, you hated me. And this is supposed to turn into some clumsy, well-intentioned, clumsy analogy for how we learned to love each other back then, and surely we could do it again now that we're all about to die. Right? She raised an eyebrow. Or were you just asking? Sighing, he raised both hands. Peace, huh? A faint smirk crossed her face. Sorry, force of habit. Anakin hesitated, trying to feel out where to go now that his script was gone out the window. Look, you're right. I should have trusted you. I was carrying this all alone, and I shouldn't have. I don't know. I feel like this whole relationship only works if we are who we're supposed to be. If I'm the crazy flyboy who isn't afraid of anything. That's a great character, Padme replied. It's not the guy I married. She reached forward, and he almost jumped. It took a second before he realized she was gripping his flesh hand with hers. And the hard-nosed skeptic partner character is one of my favorites, for me, personally, she continued. But, that's not the person you married either. He frowned. You're losing me. Stop with the literary criticism. The hand that wasn't holding his smacked the back of his head a little bit. Ha. The softness faded from her face. Her eyes shone dully. I guess what I'm saying is, we're not who we need each other to be. I'm sorry. The pilot squeezed his wife's hand tighter. I'm sorry. Really, and I'll be better from now on about letting you know what's going on. And I'll be better about asking you. And then she shook her head. But it's going to take more than that. A faint dread that he'd been holding back startled to link into his stomach again. What do you mean? She released his hand. I'm sure we both mean what we're saying right now. But we're hopped up on about 5 different kinds of adrenaline. We know we might not make it out of here. And 2 sorcerers are standing outside the ship right now. We're not level-headed. And once we've come down from all this, I think it's going to take more than some promises right now to fix things. What you didn't tell me was a big deal, Anakin. And I'm glad you're sorry, but that doesn't change that it happened. I'm sure you'll feel the same way about me once we're out of this. He fought to keep his voice steady. Are you saying when we get out of this we're over? Not remotely. Some of the familiar fire leapt back into her gaze. Then some of the old stubbornness. I've been doing this for 7 years. I'm damned if I'm letting you go that easy. But we're not going to be okay the minute this is over. We're going to need some time to figure things out. We need privacy. No neighbors. No Jedis. No war. No droid. Just you and me. By the way, I'm pretty sure she's listening right now. The intercom flashed on and off in silent acknowledgement. Anakin burst out laughing, and before too long Padme joined him, and it continued until his chest hurt. Yeah. Yeah. As they gradually came down, he hesitated, then reached out to brush against her mind. What he felt was exhaustion and worry and uncertainty. And also a fierce, in fact, overwhelming amount of what he could only guess was love. Oh, and I don't care what you say, but those 2 hitched her thumb in the direction of the exit ramp. Were definitely an item. He let his senses retract into his own skull, then waggled his eyebrows. Care to put some money on that? 10 credits. Okay. I'm warning you, if we die, you're going to still owe me after that. Section. That'll have to do, I'm afraid. Qui-Gon frowned. Sorry we can't do more, but we've got to get a move on. Her old partner gingerly felt the side of his chest.
It's better, though. Really, they only ache now. They don't crunch together.
God, man, what did you do without me?
Typically, I used my fully staffed medical bay.
You have an entire medical staff to take my place, huh? Maybe the Republic needs better doctors. He chuckled, and a moment later she joined him. She'd missed this.
I will admit,
Obi-Wan said, rubbing absently at some dirt that was still in his hair.
You would have come in handy in a few scrapes I got myself into. I'm sure you've been able to handle yourself entirely well without me.
Well, it's not life and death situations that are the problem. The Senate is so dull, Obi-Wan. You wouldn't believe it. She shook her head. Believe me when I tell you, this is the most exciting assignment I've had in years. I almost hope they find out about breaking the rules and send me off to hut space. At least then I get a chance to exercise.
Oh, come on, it can't be that bad. Where do they have you stationed in the Senate?
She leaned in and spoke at a stage whisper. Office for Interplanetary Outreach.
Oh. Okay, my sympathies.
It would at least be something if we'd successfully brought in a new member world in the time that I've been there.
Well, once we get out of this, you'll want to speak to Padme. I don't think Ocean has been snagged yet. Maybe she's your in.
Once we get out of this. How confident he sounded. A confidence she would have shared up until the last several hours. About that, Obi-Wan, I couldn't tell you in front of the others, but there's something you need to know. When she looked into his eyes, there was no surprise. The negative emotions must have been pouring off of her into his senses ever since she touched down.
What is it?
Useless to tell him the whole truth. The knowledge that his friend and fellow Jedi was soon to have her life cut short by a blade of plasma wasn't exactly what one would call good for morale. That burden would be hers to carry, hers alone. So how to put it? Well, she decided spoken plain was probably spoken best. There's a Sith on this planet. There came the surprise. What? Was all he could manage. She had to crook her smile at that. Negotiator. Tongue-tied. Red lightsaber? Dark aura, the works. She shrugged. The Force whispered in my ear. When she does that, it's best to pay attention. Slowly, Obi-Wan ran a hand through his matted hair.
And you couldn't have misinterpreted what the Force had to say in any way?
For once, it was quite literal. She could feel confusion pouring off her old partner.
There's been nothing from the Sith in centuries. No rumors. No rumors of rumors. The occasional Force user has gone rogue, but that's it.
He stared at her aghast.
Does this mean they're working with the Confederacy?
There could be another reason they're after this planet, in particular. Seems unlikely, you have to admit. She managed to chuckle. Just when you thought things couldn't get any worse, right? Yeah, he had no rejoinder. But rather than lapsing into shock, he pulled himself a centimeter straighter.
We can't warn the others. It's too much right now, but...
He briefly wrapped an arm around his chest.
I'm not in much condition to hold out for long in a sword fight.
Well, good thing I always beat the crap out of you during sparring sessions, right? He'll have to get through both of us. She put a steadying hand on his shoulder and hoped to heaven he didn't feel the faint trembling in her fingers. Look, with any luck, we're going to miss him entirely. And maybe you're right. Maybe it's just a metaphor that I'm reading entirely wrong. But I thought you should know. Slowly, he nodded.
Thank you for telling me.
A few moments later, Qui-Gon could feel his hand resting on her own shoulder.
It's good to see you again, truly.
The General, gods, she'd never get used to thinking of him like... managed to smile.
When this is all over, we'll catch up properly.
Two lousy Jedi they were. Each drowning in fear and trying to project easy, casual confidence as if the other person couldn't sense everything they were feeling. But maybe it was the fact that they were making the effort that mattered. Indeed, she replied, summoning a smirk. And maybe you can drag me out of my office. Let me tag along, too. Kenobi and Jin, together again.
Why is it
he asked, raising his eyebrow in a dry manner that he'd perfected when they worked together.
That I feel like I'd be tagging along with you.
He admits it, finally! She draped an arm across his shoulders, nodding in the direction of the spice dancer. Come on, let's let them know we're done. Then I'll chauffeur you to the latest death trap. Section.
Republic Archives. Hyperlanes. Hyperlanes are predetermined routes through hyperspace that connect explored star systems. Travel through hyperspace is inherently dangerous, and mapped hyperspace routes that are known to be safe help mitigate the risks that this form of transportation carries. Despite the existence of hyperlanes, navicomputers are still necessary for safe hyperspace travel. The hyperlane route is imprecise, and simply considered a guide to point travelers in the right direction. Navicomputers refine the route of a hyperspace jump, accounting for the movement of stars, planets, and other objects throughout space. Successful hyperspace jumps have been made without the assistance of a navicomputer, relying only on the loose guidance of a hyperlane. However, modern space vehicles have safety measures in place to prevent pilots from attempting this. The job of mapping hyperlanes is extremely risky. The Galactic Republic employs a band of highly skilled astronavigators to both maintain current hyperlanes, that is, verify they are still safe to use, and map new ones. The job pays extremely well, but a few times each year, an astronavigation voyage will depart on an uncharted hyperspace jump and never be heard from again.